Hello. 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 Why is this information? Hello. Why is this information? Hello. Hello? Can you hear me, Marsha? Oh, I can just sort of warble about things, I suppose. Can anyone hear me? Hello? Testing, testing. Ooh, 3 people are watching. According to my diagnostics. Can anybody actually hear me? I'm one of them, so that's cheating. So there's actually 2 people out there. Oh, you can actually hear me. Diddly-bom, 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 diddly-bom. Da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-dum. Can folk hear me? I'll start in... Ooh, it's just past 9 o'clock here now. I'll leave it for another 5 minutes. And then I'll kick off. In the meantime, booze. Ugh. I don't think I'm drunk enough, to be honest. Just a minute, have some more. Oh, we're up to 5. Which is, say, 4, because one of them's me, but okay, that's up to 4. That's good. Hello, 4. I'm fascinated to know, can anybody actually hear me? If so, write something in the live chat thing here. Eight of you now. I see you. Ah! Voices from the ether. Hello, A Woo and the Silver Illusion. Ooh, that's muck. Oh, good lord, it's got vodka in it. Oh, well, there you go. Hello, Darren. As I said a couple of minutes ago, I'm just going to give it about 5 minutes. It took me longer to get this thing working than anticipated. Absolutely not because of my state of mind. I am as sharp as a razor. Oh gosh, what am I drinking? Comes a bottle I expect to find a urine sample in. Smirnoff cider. I was on the Aspels earlier, and once I've finished this I'll be on the Aspels again. But currently Smirnoff cider with raspberry and pomegranate. I'll drink any muck, me. I've got absolutely no shame when it comes to booze. Does it echo badly? I had hideous feedback problems before, which is why I got this strange loop going, because there's something like, I don't know, a 10-second delay on it. And so every 10 seconds it went round again, layering deeper and deeper, and it just got ridiculous. Can you understand me sufficiently for me to read? Is it echoing horribly? No. Thank you, Lorena. Apparently you're okay, that's good. Well, it's got a list over here anywhere of people actually watching. No, it just says 14 people watching. Oh gosh, I'm full of burps. This is going to be very belchy. I am so sorry already. Some people are getting echoes and some people aren't. Curious. Bum, 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 bum. Right, now I've got a curious setup here. I've got my laptop sort of at arm's length, so I've got space for the microphone in front of me. And I've got the file in massive readovision, vision, so I can read at this range. More booze. Excellent. Right. Yes, generally it seems to be if you're getting an echo, there's something at your end of the setup. Why that should be, I can't tell you, but there you go. Right. Shall we kick off? It's about coming up to 10 past now, and it's going to take about an hour to read, I would think. I need to slug some more of this down my neck. Just a moment. I'm insufficiently plastered. Just a second. For your information, I am drinking. Well, I've had some Aspels or Suffolk, which is this stuff. I've got another bottle of it lying down here. What's that? 7% by volume. And this stuff that I'm drinking at the moment is Smirnoff cider with raspberry and pomegranate, which also has vodka in it. So it's cider and vodka. Crumbs. That's only 4%. Oh, that's disappointing. Never mind. I also have a glass of brandy and a glass of whiskey with me. I'm taking this ever so seriously. Right. Let's see how many we've got aboard now. 21. Okay. So I'm assuming this thing records. I've got absolutely no proof that it records because I've never done this before. So if it doesn't record and this just woofs off into the ether, that was exciting. I'm getting system noises now. Just woofs off into the ether. Well, you were here for this. Lucky you. Right. So here we go. More booze. Thank you. It's like being in my very own bar. I've literally got a row of bottles and glasses next to me. And a bottle opener. That's nice. And I'm using a back of a Pathfinder book as a mouse mat. Too much information. Right, here we go. Now, this is Johannes Cabal and the Blustery Day, which was the first Cabal short story I wrote. I actually wrote the novel, Johannes Cabal the Necromancer, before this, and I couldn't get it published. So I wrote some short stories, of which this is the first, and which is the second thing of mine that was ever published. Originally submitted to Weird Tales, and they turned it down. It wasn't right for them. But they did like the story, and they kept it in mind. And months later, I got an email from George Sithers saying they'd put it to one side because they had an upcoming project called H.P. Lovecraft's Magazine of Horror. And they would like my story to be in the first issue, and that's where it was published. And in issue 3 of the same magazine was published the second Johannes Cabal short story, which was Exeunt Demon King. Now, H.P. Lovecraft's Magazine of Horror is long since gone, I'm sorry to say. I think it only ran to about 5 issues. But it was an interesting magazine, and I was glad to be published in it, and in particular by George H. Sithers, who's the guy who essentially bought the story in the first place, and he was big name in magazines. He died a few years back. Anyway, here we go then. Yes. So, to George. Blimey. Right. Oh, my stomach in the morning. Right, here we go. Johannes Cabal and the Blustery Day by some silly sod or another. Here we go. Set up how to set up. Experiment 472 was a failure. The worst sort of failure. The sort of failure that comes in a compact little bundle and hides in the dark corners of one's laboratory, patiently awaiting an opportunity to leap out and sever any major blood vessels it might find in one's neck. The sort of failure that 7 crushing blows from a retort stand barely slows down. The sort of failure that is chased out onto the attic landing, whips between the banister railings, plummets 3 stories down the stairwell, and yet need only pause a moment to recover its wits before darting off again. You never got that moment. A cheap plaster bust of Napoleon Bonaparte followed it down from the attic landing. Well, the 3 stories accelerating all the way and dashed the failure into failure pate upon the instant of impact. Pate. I'm such a stickler for putting accents on words. I've got pate with a circumflex, and I think that's an acute on it, so that's nice, isn't it? You're going to have to expect a lot of these asides, because you're just going to have to expect a lot of these asides. Johannes Cabal, a necromancer of some little infamy. You know, I think that's the first place I used the phrase a necromancer of some little infamy. There you go. Yeah. Moment of history. Leaned over the banister railing from where he dropped the bust and examined the effect of cheap statuary on reanimated flesh. It told him nothing new. He expected to commit this messy act of euthanasia every few months, and the splash it made always looked very much the same. At the end of the landing was his remaining supply of ammunition. Another 5 Napoleons. So that makes 6 Napoleons altogether. There's your Sherlock Holmes reference. Pay attention. He would have to lay in it some more if his current line of experimentation continued to be so disappointing. By the harsh light of the unshaded light bulb that hung over the stairwell, Johannes Cabal looked older than his 26 years. He stood a little over 6 feet tall in his carpet-slippered feet. His short blonde hair was beginning to look unruly, and he needed a shave. Black trousers, white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, black braces and a black cravat that was coming undone through lack of attention completed his wardrobe. The tartan slippers were the only colour. He looked up at the light and wondered what time it was. He'd been working for almost 3 days without sleep, but for a very few cat naps. He felt wretched. He looked worse, and he suspected that he probably smelled by now. And for what? Another dent in the front hall's parquet, and more indelible stains on the dado. It was a hard life. Dados. Nobody ever talks about dados anymore. He switched off the lights in the attic laboratory and walked slowly down the stairs to the first floor. He paused by the bathroom, but suspected he'd just fall asleep in the bath, or do himself a mischief if he tried to shave. No. Personal hygiene could wait until he didn't feel quite so like one of the walking dead that was professional stock in trade. For once, he didn't carefully fold his clothes as he prepared for bed, but let them fall to the floor. He knew his sense of order would be outraged when he woke, but frankly it could take a running jump at the moment. Leaving a duotone heap of cloth on the rug, he crawled under the sheets, switched off the light, put his head down, closed his eyes, and knew immediately that he was going to have trouble sleeping. He hated this, being so exhausted that he couldn't drift off. There was nothing for it. He started to mentally plot out his life plan from the age of 18 if things had gone a little more mundanely. He was just up to the apprenticeship at the firm of solicitors when he passed out. End of paragraph. Oh. Sticking it down my neck. Whilst I'm on Word, I can't see what people are saying. Are people saying things? Good ambience is the last thing that was said. Is everybody enjoying it so far? Lengthy pause while YouTube catches up with me. Well, I'm going to pretend you are. Right, on with the story. Time went on, and the only sounds were the ticking of his alarm clock, the more resonant clicks of the grandfather clock in the hall, and the wooden box on the deep shelf by the fireplace in the living room, singing Underneath the Arches quietly to amuse itself. These were the usual sounds of the house, and did not disturb Cabal. At 17 minutes past 4, the whispering began. It began inevitably at the skirting boards, no more than a couple of inches above the floor, and travelled across the room toward the bed. As it travelled, more tiny voices joined it, in urgent discussion almost beyond the range of the human ear. Cabal didn't hear it physically, but psychically. It disturbed him, and he was driven up from the well of sleep with ill grace. He didn't need to look at the clock to know it was 17 minutes past 4. On the rare occasions that he suffered these visits, it was invariably at 17 minutes past 4. They even took account of summer and winter time. Why? He had no idea. He waited, apparently still asleep, but seething with impatience to get this over with. Sometimes they told him something useful. Usually they just woke him up to tell him something achingly obvious or irrelevant. "You can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make him wash it all off, Johannes." Or, "Frederick Lewis, Prince of Wales, was mortally wounded by a cricket ball," which is incidentally true. Marvellous. If he had really wanted little voices whispering gibberish in his ear, he would have invested in a radio licence. The whispering moved up the side of the bed and stopped on the pillow by his ear. Cabal kept his eyes carefully shut. He valued his sight too much to do otherwise. These were the skirting board people, and to look upon them was to be blinded, usually by rusty panel pins when least expected. After an interminable wait that the skirting board people evidently took to be dramatic, their elected spokesinger whispered sibilantly into Cabal's ear, "Johannes Cabal." This is a rubbish voice. I wish I'd rehearsed this. I could have done a much better voice. "Johannes Cabal. Johannes Cabal, the coldest wind is coming. So cold. So cold. Cold to your marrow. And it will cut you to the bone, Johannes. To the bone." Having done what they apparently regarded as their duty, they took their leave. Cabal permitted himself a frown. What were they talking about? He sat up, eyes still tightly shut, and called after them as they ran or flew or rolled back to their homes in the mouse holes of rather more than 3 blinded mice. What? What do you mean? What are you talking about? One tiny voice called back to him. The bone wind, Johannes. The bone wind is coming. Then it was gone, and the only sound was the ticking and the clicking and the box la-la-lying because it'd forgotten the words to the second verse. Cabal fell heavily back into the horizontal and exhaled vexatiously through his nose. This was just bloody typical. Oop. Splendid. Right. On to the next bit. The library was proving reticent. Bathed, shaved, freshly dressed and breakfasted, Johannes Cabal once again felt capable of taking on the world, just so long as it engaged in one torch-bearing mob at a time. He was not, however, a happy man. Nowhere could he find any references to the bone wind, and that worried him in a know-your-enemy sort of way. Then again, his library wasn't really intended for research into the weather, no matter how preternatural the weather in question was. Even then, he had no guarantee that it was a wind in any real sense at all. It might only be figurative. Metaphors irritated Cabal beyond reason. Why couldn't people just say what they meant? He remembered the tea chests of unsorted books sitting in the first cellar, and wondered if any of them might be any help. He'd been intending to index them properly at some point, but pressure of work and the intractability of the Dewey Decimal Classification System when faced with the subjects he dealt in had conspired to put him off. Not a crastinatory personality as a rule. There were only so many seconds in the day to be spent scribbling new classes in the margins of Dewey that sometimes reached 12 decimal places. These were valuable seconds, and Cabal wasn't inclined to spend them indexing books he knew he would probably never need. Still, they were all drawn from assorted special auctions and the closing down sales of failed cults, so there might be something of use in his present predicament. Down the steps and into the first, relatively innocent-looking cellar. There was a second, but its entrance was hidden and contained items he doubted the local constabulary would accept as innocent and everyday. He removed a dried-up bucket of size from a 3-legged stool and made himself relatively comfortable beneath the dusty light bulb, took a deep breath, and delved into the first chest. It was slow, laborious work. Several of the books weren't in the impressive list of languages that he spoke, and a couple looked very much like they were in cipher. These he put to one side for later examination. The others were a pathetic collection of the heartfelt outpourings of deluded minds in the main, and Cabal felt he might well be wasting whatever time he had before the mysterious bone wind made its appearance. Then, towards the bottom of the second chest, he found a water-damaged book with a provocative title. Cultus Meteorologicus, he read, grimacing at the combination of Latin and Greek. Nothing good ever came of combining Latin and Greek. Look at television. Being the accumulated knowledge of the Brotherhood of the Puissant Storm. Cabal gauged that there were 40 pages in it. Examination showed the last 7 pages to be blank, although they'd been helpfully headed notes. In his experience, this put it on par with the accumulated knowledge of most cults. A moment of concentration reminded him of the cult's fate. It had discovered the principles of summoning certain manifestations associated with the weather. With more enthusiasm than care, and more glee than sense, they had quickly arranged a ritual. It had gone very nearly to plan, but for a slip of a pencil, doing the calculations pertaining to the scale of the incantation, and instead of summoning an entity roughly analogous to Frosty the Snowman, they'd got the Wendigo. The local police were fishing frozen corpses out of the treetops for weeks afterwards. Cabal got up to go. If he had to read the maunderings of a bunch of meteorologically obsessed sociopaths, he could at least do it in comfort. Cabal entered the living room and settled down with the books in his armchair. First came a lengthy introduction that put out the Brotherhood's aims in arcing hyperbole of the most purple kind. riddled with the grammar of those who are prepared to do anything. The aims were, reduced to their simplest form, power, sex and money, the usual. The text didn't mention how having arcane knowledge of weather would help them in their thinly veiled pursuits unless there were women about with a fetish for lunatic in galoshes. If only the internet had existed then. Cabal adopted a disparaging expression and moved on. The notes went on to detail how they had taken the weather magics of other groups and cults and examined them to find out why they worked. It was a reasonable methodology, and Cabal found little here to make his lip curl. It didn't, however, stay uncurled for long. Having condensed down other overly ornamented rituals, the Brotherhood had then put on layers of their own gingerbread. They hadn't been in such a rush to make their rituals better than everybody else's, incorporating, for example, a strange hopping dance with umbrellas. They might still be alive. All things considered, thought Cabal, it had worked out for the best. Next was a set of descriptions of creatures, entities, and supernatural manifestations associated with the weather. Hail goblins, Mandarin sleet, the purple cloud, the horrid flesh-dissolving red snow of Umtak Cathal that makes a sighing noise, precipitate sprigid, parasite fog, the bone wind, cumulonemesis. Cabal set up abruptly. The bone wind? And if I might pause there for a moment. The horrid flesh-dissolving red snow of Umtak Cathal that makes a sighing noise. That's the first reference to Umtak Cathal, who at that point was just a bit of frippery and decoration for this story. But I really liked the name, so that's why he turns up in Johannes Cabal the Detective. Onwards. Cabal set up abruptly. The bone wind? The entry was short and to the point, saying in effect that if the bone wind turned its attentions to one should put one's affairs in order and prepare for the inevitable with as much serenity as possible. Cabal had the sort of personality that was only ever serene when unconscious, and read onwards. There were only a few notes, ironic given the fate of the cult, about the inadvisability of summoning the bone wind despite how easy an undertaking it was. Basically, a small ritual was performed and then you told the intended victim that the bone wind was coming. That was all there was to it. None of that tedious mucking about with nail parings or scraps of runic parchment. Cabal was just nodding sagely at the elegance of it when he paused and looked at the skirting boards. A frown crossed over his face, quickly evolving into an expression of ill-contained, teeth-grinding fury. "You bastards!" he hissed. "You ungrateful little bastards!" He made the trip down to the cellar to fetch a crowbar and went up to his bedroom. The skirting boards were nice examples of the carpenter's artistry, but that he didn't hesitate for a moment. They made a horrible creaking noise as he jammed the end of the bar between the wood and the wall and applied pressure. With a shriek of failing nails, it gave, revealing a long, low cavern, excavated into the plaster and brick behind. The skirting board people had wisely made themselves scarce, but had left a few items behind, including several small doll-sized chairs, a flip chart on a stand, and a tiny jug containing, guessing from the colour, lemon barley water. Cabal went flat on his chest, reached in and grabbed the chart. The markings on it were tiny and difficult to make out to the naked eye. Bear with me a moment. Boop, boop. La. Moments later, as Cabal stood in the bright light of day, shining through the attic laboratory's unblinded skylights, and examined the chart's sheets closely through a jeweller's loupe, their import became clear. They were the work of some Lilliputian architect. I think I'm doing really well on the polysyllabic word, all things considered. Lilliputian architect showing a sideways projection of the house, his house, with its front wall removed to show the addition of new floors within. Lots of new floors, each slightly taller than a skirting board. Cabal flung open the laboratory door and bellowed down the stairwell. "You little swine! Ingrates! I let you live here, and this is how you repay me. You'll turn this place into a condominium for louche pixies over my dead body." Which thought sobered him. That was the intention. Forewarned is forearmed, thought Cabal, as he ploughed through his books seeking a plan. Knowledge is power, but he didn't know enough. The bone wind was a wind, that at least he knew now, but he knew precious little else about it. Some sort of entity, a portal to somewhere that froze and tore the very life from its victims. A living door. All he had to do was to think of a way of shutting it. But no way presented itself, not after hours of searching. The only thing he knew for certain was that it could not stay past sunrise or nightfall, whenever it visited. If he could survive till the turn of the day, he would survive it all. He stood, stretched, and rested his hands on the desktop, a sea of open books before him. He had no choice. He was going to have to extemporize and hope one cunning ruse or another turned the trick. If not, well... Cabal started to draw his plans against his unwanted visitor. At midday, the grandfather clock struck. Slow and sonorous, the beats of the bell echoed around the house and were heard in every corner. At the front door and the back door, sealed with strips of old papyrus upon which Egyptian hieroglyphs, Ogham runes, and Patithian sigils freely mixed. But there was nobody to hear the chimes there. In the living room and the study, the window catches were encased in wax from a damnable candle, a seal placed upon them by a signet ring that Cabal had handled awkwardly, the original owner's finger still being in it. But Cabal had moved on now. In the kitchen, a pendant that had once belonged to a queen of the Nile, her name stricken from history by those that followed her reign of horrors, dangled incongruously from the taps over the sink. Nothing would pass through the water or up the drain while it hung there. Cabal had long since left the kitchen in the care of the trinket, other defences to in place. In the hallway, sitting on the 5th stair, Johannes Cabal sat and rolled up his shirt sleeves as the clock continued to strike. He had cast lots earlier that morning, and the portents had been quite ridiculously strong. The bone wind would arrive at midday. There could be no doubt. Ooh, dear me, fizzy drink. Apparently calm, he couldn't help but lick his drying lips. He tried to avoid deluding himself wherever possible, and appreciated that he had, at best, a 50-50 chance of surviving until dark. Still, he was going to be the victim of a bunch of double-dealing pocket-sized property developers. He wasn't going to go easily. It had only taken a few minutes to sabotage the pressure valve on the boiler down in the cellar. If it wasn't opened manually by nightfall, there wouldn't be enough left of the house to make a small rockery, nor enough of the traitorous skirting board people to butter a water biscuit. He stood up, picked up a leather satchel from the step and slung it over his shoulder. If the bone wind couldn't get him before the sunset, it wouldn't get him at all. His first line of defence was simply to keep it out of the house. If that failed, then he would have to fall back on the weapons in the satchel. Their creation had been a hurried exercise, and he doubted their efficacy. The house had to stand firm if he were to stand a chance. The clock struck the last stroke of 12 and left the house in slowly encroaching silence as the note died away. Well then, said Cabal, walking to the middle of the hallway, where are you? There was no answer. No sound at all but the steady tocking of the grandfather clock. Cabal waited. At 1 minute and 55 seconds past noon, the ticking stopped abruptly, plunging the house into silence. Cabal looked over his shoulder at the clock and then at the front door. Melodramatic and tardy, he called out. What a dismal combination. The bone wind struck the front of the house like an express train. Cabal took a step backwards despite himself. It howled and screamed against the walls like a living thing, battering at the door, shrilling and banshee shrieking. Beneath these sounds there was just audible a ghastly counterpoint of scratching and scrabbling as of 1,000 bony fingers clawing to get in. The door rattled frantically in its frame, and even seemed, to Cabal's closely attentive eye, to bulge in a manner unseemly for English oak. But it held, and it held well, and Cabal's confidence grew. The parchment strips that sealed the door into its frame made the physical barrier a metaphysical one too, and seemed to be frustrating the wind's efforts to enter magnificently. "My own variation on the warding of Kush," he called to the bone wind, as much to steady his nerve as to taunt his enemy. "Quite efficacious, don't you find?" In answer, everything abruptly grew silent. Cabal ran to the living room window in time to see something outside that was clear air, yet distorted the sky behind it like molten glass, that was speckled with flecks of black that whirled into and out of existence on the moment, that held storm crows, finger bones and teeth as flickers in the light. Then it whirled upwards and he couldn't see it anymore. He threw himself back into the hall and up the stairs in a ferment of agonized anticipation. Wherever it tried to get in, he had to be there to face it. Along the landings he ran, the bone wind flinging itself against window after window in mounting fury, the light becoming filtered and profane wherever it passed. Window after window shivered and creaked in its frame. Window after window rattled and squeaked as the bones of the wind hailed against the glass. But through it all, window after window held, strong against the onslaught. After every failed assault, Cabal's confidence grew. Onwards and upwards the bone wind moved until it was battering upon the attic skylights. Cabal stood there in the middle of the laboratory floor, arms crossed, and looked up at it. It was a thing half seen in full sight, something that had no right to be there, but outstayed its short welcome, hospitated in the land of the living. Finally, it stopped its onslaught and hung in the air above the house. It and its intended victim watched each other. "Well, that must be frustrating for you," said Cabal, understanding now that it sensed his words at a projective telepathic level. "Interesting, but not unknown. You've tried every door and every window, and they're all warded against you. I had a busy morning. You daren't even crack a pane of glass. We both know the penalty for that." The bone wind boiled and thrashed. "Oh, yes, we do," continued Cabal. "You can't get in at all. I've sealed every door against you, every window, every gap in the structure." He paused. In one movement he swept his blue glass spectacles into his hands, and the eyes revealed were wide with surprise and horror. "Ach du lieber Gott!" he cried in a terrible voice. "The coal hole!" In that moment the bone wind was gone, whirling down and around to the outside of the house. Cabal, meanwhile, put his spectacles back on, checked his watch and waited, the paroxysm of terror quite gone. 10 minutes later the air above the house convulsed again, and the bone wind was back. "Oh, my mistake," said Cabal conversationally. "The boiler's oil-fired. Hope you didn't waste too long looking for a non-existent coal chute." "You did? Oh, well." He scratched his ear. "I suppose that takes us 10 minutes closer to nightfall." The bone wind dropped with a massive certainty towards the house, as imminent as an elephant, screaming in anger. Unlike an elephant, it bounced. The wards were strong against it, and it could find no way in. Cabal drew up a chair and arranged himself comfortably, lounging back so that he might watch the bone wind through the skylights. He reached over to where he had flung his jacket carelessly on the workbench and found his cigar case in the pocket. Lighting up one of the thin, dark cigars he favoured on the rare occasions he smoked, he leaned back and observed the furious entity that had been sent to kill him in a manner too horrible to describe. After a few moments of silent consideration, he started puffing smoke rings at it. The bone wind made a crackling howl that reverberated around the valley and vanished from view. Cabal laughed a low laugh and settled down to enjoy his cigar. More booze. How's this going for everybody? I'm going to open another bottle because I'm a monster and I have no self-control. I've lost count now. Into a bottle of Aspals, which is a feisty 7% by volume, so this will be fun. Have a slap of that. Thank you very much, Judith. It is terrific German, I have to say. Right, back into the fray. Oh no, it's completely the wrong page. Bear with me. Right. Well, before I do that. Yes. Time passed slowly. Despite his display of sang-froid, Cabal knew perfectly well that he remained in deadly peril until the Bonewind was forced to leave the corporeal realm and return to its home of negative life. According to the almanac, the sun would set at a little after 6, which meant he had almost 5 hours to wait it out. There was no reason why the wards would fail before then, but it would be a foolish man who would not allow for such an occurrence, and Cabal was no fool. He settled down to transcribe some experimental results to his permanent notebooks, but never once took the satchel off. The afternoon wore on. He heard the Bonewind travel through the back garden at one point, making a mess of the herbaceous border as it went. Frustrations had made it quite childish and spiteful. He wondered what would happen to it when it failed, as he now felt quite sure it would, and return to whence it came. He hoped it was something bad. He'd been rather fond of his herbaceous border. At a little while past 4, Cabal decided he wanted a pot of tea. Just about to rise from his chair, he paused and considered. Did he really want some tea? No, he decided after some introspection, he didn't. The desire was being triggered by something else, something internal. His subconscious was trying to tell him something, but being a subconscious couldn't just go ahead and tell him, oh no, I had to get all signs and symbols with him. Cabal usually didn't get cross with the workings of his inner mind, because after all, he was on his side and had often helped him in the past. He just wished he wouldn't insist on being so bloody abstruse. Under the circumstances, however, he couldn't help but feel a little irritated. It's a matter of life and death, isn't it? He said to himself, very literally. Nothing to do with tea. What is it? The desire for a nice, unnecessary cup of tea and a slice of Swiss roll grew in him. I don't want a cup of tea, and I haven't even got any Swiss roll in the larder. Or did he? Cabal didn't usually forget things, but he had an odd paranoid feeling that perhaps there was really a Swiss roll. A nice one. On a plate in the larder. Why didn't he go down and see? Look, I need a clearer idea of why my life depends on Swiss roll and tea. If I'd wanted tea, it would have been over an hour ago at 3. It's now, he checked his pocket watch, 4:15. Why drag tea into it at all? As portents go, it's... He paused, then pulled his watch back from his waistcoat pocket. It wasn't 15 minutes past 4 at all. It's 17 minutes past. Ach, scheisse! He was already running for the door. On the top landing, he snatched up a bust of Napoleon and threw it violently down the stairwell. Not even pausing to see its effect, he flung himself down the stairs. In the hallway, a few of the skirting board people jumped in surprise when the bust shattered into fragments behind them, but it only gave them momentary pause. They had other things to do. By the time Cabal bounded from the bottom landing and came down in a crouch amidst the plaster fragments, he was too late. He just had a momentary impression of a slip of parchment vanishing under the skirting board by the door, the realization that the short strip that had sealed the letterbox was gone, and then the Bonewind was in. The flap of the letterbox flipped up, and the Bonewind poured through like water through a pierced hull, distorting the image of the door like gelled air. Flashing blackness detailed its heart as it rose tall and triumphant, not 10 feet from Cabal. Cabal's hand drove reflexively into the depths of the satchel and grabbed at something, anything, to use as a weapon. His hand closed on some small glass vessel that he flung with a smooth whiplash action into the centre of the boiling chaos and hoped for the best. The glass bulb smashed against something that wasn't there in any true scientific sense, and its contents, a grey metallic powder, spilled and flared, caught by the flexing gusts and drafts that were the Bonewind's muscles and fibres. Cabal blinked. The bulb had contained the powder of Ibn Ghazi, and its power was to render the invisible visible. For 10 heartbeats, for an eternity, he looked upon the true face of the Bonewind. "Seen worse," said Johannes Cabal, and bolted for the stairs. The Bonewind darted after him, angling up and sideways to negotiate the stairwell. Cabal flung fistfuls of unholy caltrops and mystical cantrips after him as he ran, but they fell away uselessly from the raging thing that pursued. In its eagerness to be upon him, it accelerated too harshly up the well and overshot the landing Cabal was on. In the moment it took to turn and descend, it had lost him. It jetted onto the first floor hall and hung there, listening. For long moments there was nothing, then distantly, a clink of metal from one of the rooms. The door to the room offered no resistance to an entity like the Bonewind. Despite being locked, it was easily torn from its hinges and dumped down the stairwell to finish amid bits of Napoleon's head. With a shriek, the Bonewind stopped into the room and halted. On the bed lay an ancient skeleton chained to the bed frame. After a moment, the skeleton turned its skull to look at the shattered door frame and waved one bony hand at its visitor in a gesture that seemed more matey than threatening. The Bonewind hovered, confused. It was not very intelligent and confused easily. It had shredded plenty of living flesh from skeletons in the past, but was at a loss at what to do in this situation. Its indecision evaporated with the sound of Cabal breaking cover from the next landing up and charging up the stairs. With a hunter's cry, the Bonewind was after him. On the bed, the skeleton flopped back to rest, with a faint air of exasperation about it. Cabal made the attic laboratory with less than a second to spare. He slammed it hard behind him, the attic door, that is, but was immediately shoved back as the door was dealt a fearful concussion that tore the striker plate out of the frame. Cabal pushed it shut with all his strength and weight. In the moment before his dreadful pursuer could deliver another blow, Cabal bit at his right index finger and deliberately tore it down to the quick. Blood welled immediately. Using his fingertip as a gored brush, he marked the wood of the door with a triangle in a circle, stepped away from it and barked an incantation in a language that left his throat raw. An abrupt, terrible silence fell. Then the door moved in its frame, slowly, so slowly, upwards, then down again. Up and down, up and down. Faster and faster, until it was rattling, chattering like a fever patient's teeth. Cabal walked slowly backwards. The impromptu seal he had placed upon the door could only last a matter of minutes at most, and sunset was still comfortably over an hour away. He had to think, and think quickly. He looked around. The Bonewind was a creature of death, a gateway to a place where life was treasured as a foodstuff, the only foodstuff. A wasteland of death hungered for him, ravened for him. Perhaps, thought Cabal, perhaps I can poison it. Sucking at his torn fingertip, he flicked quickly through his notebooks with his free hand. Behind him, the door was vibrating so rapidly it was no longer visible as a sharp image, but only as a blur within the stationary frame. A few splinters flew from the top and the bottom ends as it started to fall to pieces. He ignored it, busy with his retorts and powders, fluids and reaction vessels. The door was whining, a sound that ranged up and down from the subsonic to the ultra, rattling everything in the house. Cabal clenched his teeth and fought nausea as the sound battered and shook him. He clipped electrodes to either side of a sealed vessel and flung the bayonet switch of the spark generator. Just a few more seconds. Just a few more. Suddenly, the frequency of the door climbed and swooped, heterodyning in strange patterns that defied conventional theory. Cabal was aware that his nose had started bleeding even as he cut the power. He smeared his already bloody fingertip in the red stream that ran across his lips and dripped from his chin, flicked open the vessel's lid and allowed her drop to fall inside. Something flexed within, a movement he felt rather than heard. He looked steadily at the door and waited his moment. The door didn't explode. Instead, the vibration stopped instantly, and the door stood motionless, still filling the frame. Then it crumbled silently into sawdust, but for the muffled thud of the handle and catch mechanism falling into the soft bed of freshly powdered wood. Cabal's expression became grim. He hated hanging doors. Somebody or something was going to pay for that. The Bonewind swept in, screaming its victory. At the same moment, Cabal turned the reaction vessel to face the oncoming monstrosity and opened it wide. Experiment 473 was a success. The best sort of success. The sort of success that comes in a compact little bundle and flings itself straight at an eldritch weather condition. The sort of success that is immediately devoured by a portal between here and somewhere else. A place where life is savoured as a delicacy. A place that has never experienced anything like Experiment 473. If it were possible for a body of air to have an expression, the Bonewind would have looked aghast. It had every right. Somewhere within it, somewhere beyond it, Experiment 473 was running amok. Furious to be given life, but damned if it was going to give it up. The Bonewind grew quiet, curdled slightly. Cabal picked up another vessel and aimed it. "There's more where that came from," he said. The vessel was empty, naturally, but the Bonewind wasn't to know that. It backed away, moaning dismally. "Out of my house," said Cabal quietly. The Bonewind faltered, uncertainly. "Get out of my house!" roared Cabal, and released the vessel's catch. The Bonewind retreated slowly out of the laboratory, apparently regarding the vessel Cabal bore before him as a vampire regards a cross, or almost everybody regards a Jehovah's Witness. Once over the banister railing, it descended quickly to the ground floor, Cabal dogging it every step of the way. In the hallway, it moved to the door, fumbled pathetically with the flap of the letterbox for some moments, and then slunk out through the slot. The whole performance has a sense of shame and humiliation about it that, under the circumstances, Cabal rather enjoyed. He daubed the letterbox with his own blood, made himself hoarse repeating the incantation, and then flopped to the floor, exhausted. All in all, he considered, it had been a very long day. Night fell, and Johannes Cabal knew that he was safe from the Bonewind. No time to rest, though, things to be done. After making an adjustment to the boiler's pressure valve, he went to the woodshed and got out his old bicycle. There was a bit of shopping he wanted to do at the village, and it couldn't wait. Of course, the hardware shop would be shut, but they'd open for him. They would if they knew what was good for them. Cabal finally went to bed a little past midnight, but although he extinguished his light and laid down his head, he didn't sleep. There was still a certain business to attend to. He lay there, eyes shut but completely conscious, for over 4 hours, waiting. At 17 minutes past 4, the whispering started. It began inevitably at the skirting boards, no more than a couple of inches above the floor, and travelled across the room towards bed. It got perhaps 3 feet before there was a loud clack and a strangled cry. The whispering moderated. Panic set in. It headed off at an angle, but almost immediately there was another snap, and another, and another. The whispering was now a very quiet frenzy of terror, as the skirting board people blundered into one after another of the 200 mouse traps that Cabal had spent the best part of the evening mining his bedroom floor with. He listened attentively as the choir attenuated and diminished, the voices thinning away until only one remained. "Carefully does it," the last tiny voice said to itself. "Take my time. If I can just get back to the skirting..." Cabal listened carefully, but the only sounds were the ticking of his alarm clock, the more resonant clicks of the grandfather clock in the hall, and the wooden box on the deep shelf above the fireplace in the living room singing "Spread a Little Happiness" quietly to amuse itself. These were the usual sounds of the house and did not disturb him. Johannes Cabal rolled over, smiled in the darkness, and went to sleep. And there you go. The end. Yes, indeed. The illustration that's up on the screen at the moment is by an artist called George Barr, and that was the illustration in H.P. Lovecraft's Magazine of Horror back in the day. It's nice, isn't it? All the little skirting board people at the bottom as well. There you go. Was that fun? Everybody enjoy that? Oh dear. Alright. I've got a pile of booze left to go. I've still got the whiskey and the brandy to get through. I could read something else, I suppose, if you've got nothing else to do. You're all very kind. Thank you very much. Not nearly as drunk as I was expecting, from considering the amount I've stuck down my neck this evening. Right. Well, as I say, I don't think my setup saved that, so you're the only folk who are probably ever going to hear that. Oh, a long spoon is really rather long. Not just a spoon, the story itself. I mean, that's novelette length. That's about twice the length of what I just read, and that took me an hour. I don't know what else I've got that's kind of shortish. Not for Cabal, anyway. Bear with me a second. Oh. Bear with just a sec. I'm loading stuff, and my laptop's already running about 3,000 things, so it's taking a minute. But if you hang around a tiny bit longer... Right, this is a tiny thing. It's only it's not only even 300 words. And it's a Cabal thing that's actually on ice at the moment. But I'll read just this to it, and you can work out yourself what it is. Does that sound like fun? Anybody want to hear this? Ooh, or a Boris Ouzo. I could do that. That's not very long. Okay, I'll read this little thing, and then I'll do your Boris Ouzo if you're still interested. Okay, this little thing. As I say, I'm not going to tell you what it's called. You can work that out for yourself. And it's just this teeny tiny thing. As I say, it's less than 300 words. Johannes Cabal was delighted to receive the invitation. It was always gratifying when the application of careful bribery and creative blackmail got one what one wanted. Cabal cared little for the social climbing the invitation to the Christmas party at Maple Durham Hall represented. He was desperately antisocial at the best of times, and anyway the party represented little more than a small ripple in soiree society. That, however, wasn't the point. A substantial part of Cabal's energies were focused on research into and the acquisition of certain data. One such line of inquiry led him to a practical interest in a small volume entitled Nocturnes, written by a Father Erasmus 120 years before. There seemed to be only one copy in existence, and this book had tumbled from collection to collection via auctions and bequests until it fetched up as part of a job lot, purchased for the purpose of making the Childer family look intellectual 40 years ago. Nocturnes had ended up tucked away somewhere on 480 feet of partially catalogued shelving in the library of the Childers' ancestral home, Maple Durham Hall. Of course, he could simply have approached the sole surviving member of the family, Lady Elspeth Childer, and attempted to buy the book. Then, however, she might have wondered why anybody would want an obscure Latin thesis on the semantic elements of death. Cabal couldn't afford that sort of idle musing. His profession was very unpopular in most circles, the sort of unpopular that involves capital sentences and gibbets. It would be a lot easier in the long run if he just stole the thing. There you go. Two voices for all the different conversations in Ouzo. Okie dokie. Right, bear with me while I open that. Hello, files. Where the hell am I? That's not the right file at all. There we go. Cabal Shorts. Or a Boris Ouzo. I'm going to have to make it a bit bigger. Right, here we go. Well, it's longer than I thought. It's still shorter than than Blustery Day, but it's a little bit over 5,000 words. Rump. Right, are we all strapped in for a Boris Ouzo? That's a wretched pause while I wait for YouTube to catch up with me. Right, there we go. A zillion thumbs up says yes. Boris Ouzo by this drunken idiot here. Just a minute. Not nearly drunk enough and an idiot. I can't believe I've got through all this booze so quickly. Dear me. Boris Ouzo. I am. I'm one of those irritating people who doesn't get hangovers. Maybe acid stomach now and then, but I'm not sure I've ever had a hangover. Boris Ouzo. Greece did not find favour with Johannes Cabal. It was too bright, too hot, too many of the locals wore their shirts open-necked and rolled sleeve for his liking, and the place was awash with foreigners of every shade intent on absorbing culture through osmosis rather than study. While he respected the country for undeniably being the cradle of modern Western civilization, although not the several previous Western civilizations, a nugget of occult knowledge he kept to himself, as much because he was antisocial as for any reasons of avoiding upset to current orthodoxy. He found little to admire in the current state of the place. He didn't seem to be trying very hard these days, contenting itself with harvesting olives and pandering to tourists. He also found the sight of Greek Orthodox priests sinister, and this from a man who had encountered priesthoods that wore the flayed skins of their human sacrifices. Human leather jerkins were one thing, but those big Greek Orthodox, Camelokian hats were simply baleful. I've almost certainly mispronounced that. I do beg your pardon, if you happen to be a Greek Orthodox person. It may therefore be taken as a given that it would take a great deal to induce Cabal to travel so far and to suffer such discomforts. If one expected him to immediately hie himself off to some museum to relieve it of an item that was vital to his studies, however, one would be disappointed. It also says little for one that one would be disappointed in the non-criminal behaviour of another. One should be ashamed of oneself. Disappointment aside, it was usual. Any lengthy trip Cabal took to involve a serious felony at some point, with misdemeanours scattered carelessly about it. Not this time, however. Cabal arrived at his hotel, rested and refreshed himself, and then made his way to a small taverna on the edge of the little town. It was clean. It was a clean, almost austere establishment, backed by a cliff and overlooking the cleft in the land where the town had formed around a natural harbour. Fishing boats bobbed at anchor by the quay, and the brilliant Mediterranean sun glinted from the wine-dark sea of Homer, although it looked more like blue to Cabal. Even with his smoked glass spectacles, it was too irritatingly bright to his eyes, made sensitive by a surfeit of darkness, and he was glad to turn his back upon it and enter the taverna. The place was almost deserted, he was pleased to notice, his eyes adjusted to the less strident light. There was a man, presumably the owner, standing behind the bar. Cabal noted the paunch, dark hair tending to grey at the temples, the carefully kept moustache, the expression of very mild curiosity as he looked up from his newspaper. A natural philosopher, Cabal concluded. Reasonably intelligent, although likely ill-educated, not an uncommon type for a guardian. Cabal felt he was on familiar ground. The taverna owner seemed to take in Cabal with equal rapidity. "Good morning, sir," he said, in clear, if accented English. I can't do a Greek accent, I'm not even going to try. "We do not open until noon. I am sorry." Cabal did not reply. He walked to the bar, feeling in his jacket pocket as he did so. His jacket was not of his habitual black, nor were his trousers, nor even his shoes or hat. Instead, he had outfitted himself in cream linen, and wore a light hat of the kind known as a Panama. He had convinced himself of the necessity not to die of heat exhaustion, and had planned his wardrobe accordingly, though it pained him. He was only glad that he would not be seen by anyone who he might see again. While Cabal prided himself on his lack of vanity, He was deluding himself on that score. Change of scene. Not that one. Let's go for that one. Nope, done that one. Done that one. There we go. In his pocket he found, nestling against a .25 ACP Baby Browning semi-automatic pistol, a coin. He tossed it onto the bar, where it clattered on its back for a second before settling. The taverna owner looked down, placidly unconcerned. Cabal had the distinct impression the man would have been more taken aback if the coin had been a normal one. That it was a gold coin about the size of a florin, and that only a handful of similar coins had ever been minted, was entirely to be expected, it seemed. The taverna owner picked it up and studied it briefly, taking the design of a snake swallowing its tail on both the obverse and reverse sides, the only difference being that one design was a mirror image of the other. It was a far more cursory glance than the close study Cabal had given it when it had first come into his possession. He had seen that the representation of a snake was thoroughly medieval, and it would make any herpetologist tear at his beard or make similar expressions of dismay. For one thing, it had legs. Assuming it wasn't meant to be a rendering of a dragon, in which case it still wasn't covering itself in glory as a creature with no wings, Cabal could only guess that the artist had somehow never seen a snake and had taken the biblical curse upon the serpent to crawl upon its belly to mean that it had stumpy little legs rather than none at all. As an aside, Johannes Cabal had loathed medieval figurative art with an acidic disdain. One might say this was a petty sort of thing to be vexed by, and he should show a little perspective. Cabal would say if only medieval artists had shown any, he would not hate their works so. The taverna owner looked up and looked Cabal in the face, dropping the coin into his waistcoat pocket. "You're expected," he said, a note of weariness in his voice, as if this duty laid heavily upon him and rarely ended well. Cabal was hardly surprised that his arrival had been anticipated. The coin had cost him far more than its weight in gold, both in money and in favours. Of course the agents of this enterprise would have communicated its sale to the taverna. "Then you're ready for me," said Cabal. More than once in the past this would have been a signal for a bunch of cultist assassins to come boiling out of a back room, and Cabal regretted that his usual Webley 577 was at home. Too huge a handgun to sail through customs without attracting attention. Still, the Browning was loaded with hollow-nosed rounds, so that was some recompense. The owner sighed, the sigh of a man who does not enjoy this part of his job, but no cultists came a-boiling, so Cabal understood his melancholy to be entirely spiritual. "Your friend arrived half an hour ago. He's waiting in the private room." "Friend?" said Cabal. The idea was baffling to him. "I have no friends." And this was no more than the truth. "Colleague, then?" said the owner, uninterested in semantics. "Nor colleagues, for it is the lot of the necromancer to live a life of solitude, the only type of party they generally attend being the sort that involves an impromptu hanging and a burning of one's life work." "There is a man," said the owner, running out synonyms for friend in his small yet functional English vocabulary. "He is in the private room. He said you would be coming." Cabal considered the possibilities, and concluded that it could only be somebody involved further up the diffuse structure of what in one light was a business and in another a conspiracy. That he was unknown to the taverna owner was hardly surprising in that case. "This man, what does he look like?" "You'll see him in a moment," said the owner, and led the way before Cabal could outline the advantages of forewarnings. Cabal followed the man up into an enclosed stairwell, and thence to a short landing above the taverna's public room. He opened a door and gestured inside. With some small foreboding, Cabal entered, but was only surprised to find himself in the small private dining room alone. When the owner looked in, the glances he gave hither and thither showed that he was not alone in this. "It was here," said the owner. He seemed mildly curious rather than perturbed. "An old man, he said you would be here soon." He dispersed the mystery from his attention with a shake of his head. "I must have left for a minute. He'll be back. I'll bring you your meal, mister." "I didn't come here to eat," said Cabal sharply. The taverna owner looked at him a little pityingly. "You cannot drink on an empty stomach. It is bad." He vanished from the door, and Cabal heard his heavy tread descending the stairs. Left alone, Johannes Cabal inspected the room. The first thing he noted, barely consciously but by a reflex born of hard experience, was that the room only had one door by which to enter and exit it. There was, however, a broad window overlooking the wood and canvas canopy that protected the outdoor dining area, and one light was open to allow the gentle Seabreeze Inn. This, if push came to a shove, as it so often did, would allow a rapid if undignified egress, and the frame looked strong enough to bear the weight of a running necromancer should he decide to escape this way or that. Slurp. The room itself was as austere as the one below, with only a few small, cheap prints of the Parthenon, the Acropolis, and the sanctuary of Asclepios at Epidaurus. Why do I do this to myself? To clutter the walls. So I'm getting the giggles, or I am getting drunk. There were a couple of bookshelves in an alcove, but they were barely troubled by a handful of books on each, and mercifully for Cabal's easily bruised aesthetic sense, no items of bric-a-brac. For furniture, a square table with 2 chairs facing one another. He was absorbed by the view across the bay to a steep headland when the taverna owner returned bearing a tray upon which was a plate of finger foods, some bread, a shot glass, and a miniature bottle of green glass. He looked around the room, once more displaying some bemusement. "You still can't find this mysterious friend of mine, can you?" ventured Cabal. "Oh no," replied the owner, still peering around. "I have just seen him now, on the stairs ahead of me." He looked at Cabal as if he could explain the matter. "The old gentleman came in here." "Nobody has come in here until you returned just now," said Cabal with heavy emphasis. He looked at the tray. "Leave it on the table, if you would." The taverna owner did so, and with another glance around the room, left. Cabal sat down, back to the window, facing the door, and arranged the meal to his satisfaction. The plate of bread here, the bowls of tzatziki and dolmadakia. Oh, jeez. Another slurp. Dolmadakia. Is it dolmadakia? Dolmadakia. And a rare crudités there. He took a carrot stick. The presence of carrot was apparently the platter's nod to international cuisine, and the small bottle crunched thoughtfully upon the former as he regarded the latter. The bottle was stoppered with a small cork sealed in orange wax, and the body was marked only with a simple label. It bore no writing, only the image of Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. This was why he had come here. This was a product of a great investment in time and assets. He had to admit, it did not seem like so very much. The glass contained a few fragments of ice, freshly chipped. He took his switchblade from his pocket, clicked it open, and carefully peeled away the seal. Once freed, the cork came away easily, and he dropped it by his plate. Cabal took a cautious sniff at the bottle's open mouth and shied a little from the strong smell of anise that met him. With a small grunt of displeasure, for he is no great devotee of louching spirits, be they Sambuca, absinthe, or in this case ouzo, he poured the liquid over the ice. Do beg your pardon. As it mixed with the ice water, brought bleeding from the fragments, the clear spirit grew cloudy. Cabal knew it was nothing more remarkable than the formation of an emulsion, but it seemed fancifully to him that the ouzo was making the water curdle. He thinned his lips, both in response to such an unscientific thought, and to the terrible ordeal that faced him. He strongly disliked the liquor and its kin. He put the fateful moment off a little longer by dabbling another carrot stick in the tzatziki and slowly eating it. As he ate, he regarded the door before him. It was open, allowing him a view of the small empty landing. This was not interesting in itself, but that he was sure the taverna owner had shut the door on leaving was. Yet there it was, open. He had not turned his back on it for 1 second, nor barely taken his eyes from it. Yet there it was, open. He had a strong sense that he already knew the significance of this, and although it was not intrinsically perilous in itself, still it served to make the room seem a little chillier. He took up the glass and sniffed at the liquor. It was vile, by his lights in any case. Still, he was not here to enjoy the stuff, only to endure it. He tilted back his head and poured the foul stuff down his throat. Even as he was swallowing, he was slamming down the glass and reaching for some food to take the taste away. As he chewed on some fragments of salad, an old man entered the room. The man did not introduce himself or even acknowledge Cabal's presence immediately. He simply drew back the chair opposite Cabal and sat there. looking around the room with bored curiosity as if in a waiting room. Finally looked across the table, yet still did not meet Cabal's gaze until the man frowned slightly, and he saw Cabal as if it were the first time he had even noticed he was present. "Ah," said the man, "there you are." "I have been here the whole time," said Cabal. "No," said the man, "no you haven't. Not the whole time." Cabal decided he didn't like the man. Now only remained to see where on the spectrum of animosity he should place him, which would indicate what actions he might pick from his palette of unpleasantness. Anything from cutting sarcasm all the way through to emptying the Browning into the man. Cabal looked the newcomer up and down. He seemed to be a reasonably well-preserved 60-odd-year-old, thinning white hair, pale complexion, blue eyes only a little rheumy. Cabal looked at the man's eyes, then at the shape of his face. He exhaled contemptuously. "Oh, for God's sakes," Cabal said, "this is how the stuff works?" "Well, yes," said the man complacently. "What were you expecting? A shining tunnel into the unknown? Really, young man, if you continued your researches even an hour longer, this would be no surprise to you. I researched for 3 weeks. Oh, you should have made it 3 weeks and an hour then, shouldn't you?" The man helped himself to some bread and dolma-dakia. Greek stuff. "Don't mind, do you?" he said, and started eating without waiting for a reply. The man ate unhurriedly for the next half a minute, while Cabal's short fuse burnt out. "Well," he demanded finally, "tell me." The man had just taken a bite of bread and chewed it slowly at the same time, signalling by means of hand gestures to Cabal that he had just taken a bite of bread, was chewing it slowly, and would Cabal be so kind as to wait until he had swallowed. "Nah," he said, once he had swallowed. "Much better. I missed breakfast to be here." "Do I really become so irritating?" "Not at all," said the man, who was also Johannes Cabal. "You're irritating now. You simply become a little more urbane in how you express it. There, I've vouchsafed you a vision of the future. I'll be getting along now." He did not get up, but only smiled at Cabal. "Not really what you had in mind, is it?" "You know full well why you're here," said Cabal, grateful that he could theoretically do his future self to death without endangering his own existence. The man picked up the empty bottle and examined the wordless label. "Boris Ouzo, one of a number of interesting potions that will only work for the imbiber once. You appreciate that I've spent many years wishing I'd saved that coin for a more worthy use. Still," he shook the bottle and put it down, "what is done is done." Cabal started to open his mouth, but Manna interrupted him with, "Yes, I'm sure that if you had really wanted a selection of well-worn aphorisms, you could have bought a box of Christmas crackers and regaled yourself with the mottos. I remember saying that when once I sat where you are now. I was so amusing." He smiled. He did so easily, and Cabal realised that he must do it habitually. A small terror ran through him. Just what monster had he summoned from the veiled future? But wait, was that sarcasm? "Yes." The smile did not waver. "Of the cutting variety. So I am summoned by the agency of a platter of food and a disgusting drink. Indeed, I can tell you this of your future. You shall never, ever acquire a liking for Ouzo. Still, much nicer than all that mucking around with dead goats and such like when you're summoning demons. That never gets any better. If you are me," said Cabal, although he knew it certainly was, "then you know what I am about to ask." "Of course." The man leaned forward, his smile fading. "You'll also appreciate why I cannot tell you." Cabal did not. "What?" he said, slightly stunned by this development. "You had better be able to tell me. I did not willingly—" Yes, I know. How can I not? It's inconvenient. It's hot. You feel your dignity is being weighed upon, although, if it's any compensation, that outfit actually rather suits you." "No compensation at all," said Cabal, anger flicking like a cat's tail. "Little point in growing angry with me. The only reason I'm not furious with you is that I've had years to get over it. Indeed, I've reconciled myself to my imminent extinction at your hands. Not actual hands," he added quickly, "metaphorical hands." Inwardly, Cabal shrunk the spectrum of animosity so that it no longer included himself shooting himself 6 times across a table. "I don't know what you mean," he said. "I have no intention of harming you." "Well, I know that," said the man impatiently. "That's not what I meant. I must admit, I wish I could recall this conversation better." "I shall make notes," said Cabal, reaching for his inner jacket pocket. "No, no, no," said the man. with a sudden glint of real anger that absolutely confirmed to Cabal's satisfaction that he was talking to himself. Don't do that. Why would you do that? You'll make this whole conversation unbelievably tedious if you know exactly what's going to be said. It's far more fun just to forget about it. Fun, said Cabal, his tone hollow. Perhaps this was not his future self after all. Yes, fun. At some point you will unexpectedly come down with an attack of fun and find that you actually rather like it. The man paused, even flinched slightly. I remember this. I very much doubt, began Cabal, but the man was gone. Or at least he'd been replaced by himself, but different. He had been wearing a suit much like Cabal's current linen affair. Now he was in black. He was tanned, weathered and gaunt, and he had but one eye, the dead socket covered by an eye patch. Running down to his brow to the cheek was an ugly, jagged scar, a reminder of the incident that must surely have taken the eye. Cabal looked at this new vision of the future and blinked. No predetermination, he said in little more than a whisper. Of course there's no predetermination, you fucking idiot, said the man, except where the lines cross. That staples things down. This, he gestured at the room they were in, then slapped both palms on the table for emphasis, is predetermined. You had to be here because I'm here, and so was he, the version you shunted off into oblivion because fun is a dirty word to us. Cabal did not reply. He was too busy taking the actual nature of the vision that the Ouzo granted him. He had not been expecting anything so contingent of factors he could not foresee. This is not what I expected. I simply wanted to know if your current research is worthwhile because you can see it taking years to find out the hard way. He fell silent and looked at Cabal. It's hard to know if he did so with loathing or whether it was just how his face looked in that future. And does it? asked Cabal. In my life, I'm still working on it. But there have been distractions. He tapped to the lower end of the scar. In that last versions, I don't know. You eliminated him before finding out. I didn't mean to, said Cabal, sounding somewhat feeble even to his own ear. I didn't mean to. It was bad enough being mimicked disrespectfully at the best of times, but it was immeasurably worse when one does it to insult oneself and is thus rather too accurate for comfort. God's teeth, boy, snarled the man. Didn't you experience in the ghoul warrens teach you anything? Ghoul warrens? What ghoul warrens? The man settled back in his chair, exasperated with himself for making an unforgivable temporal faux pas. Ah, scheisse, he said, and then he was no longer there. It was not simply the case that he vanished, or that he had never been, but that he had never been, nor would he ever. His replacement was, and would be, no improvement. Cabal took in the canine muzzle, the erect ears, the horrible rubbery flesh, the nakedness. His new interlocutor was not at all interested in him. Instead it was poking around amidst his plate. No Pope, it reported at last, clearly disappointed. No, said Cabal, both to the inferred question and to the possible future. The chair was empty. Cabal looked at it, his brow furrowed. Did this mean that his current state of mind would take him down a path in which he would surely die, or there was a faint possibility that... He took up a piece of onion from his salad and tossed it at the chair. It behaved exactly as one might expect. So, he didn't end up invisible in that future. Or he also had to consider the possibility that the Ouzo had run its course and he had endured all the glimpses of the future he was going to. Neither of these was the most likely explanation of his absence in the chair, and therefore his future, but this most likely explanation was not one he cared to think about in any great detail. Instead, he tried flexing his potentiality. He made up his mind that he would do this rather than that in the future, go here rather than there. The chair remained stubbornly empty. Cabal swallowed slowly. He couldn't be dead in all those futures, could he? He picked up the miniature bottle. Perhaps there might be a few drops left, and surely that would count as part of the same dose. He was just about to upend the bottle over the shot glass when the chair was suddenly occupied by himself, looking much the same as he already did, but for some obvious putrefaction and the eternally confused mien of the average zombie. Oh dear, said Cabal quietly. The undead him looked across the table at the alive him and shrugged hopelessly. I don't suppose you recall what led you to your current state, do you? Cabal asked without any great expectation of an answer. He was therefore surprised when the zombie pointed at the bottle of his hand and wagged a rotting finger at him. Really? asked Cabal. He carefully put the bottle down as one might a slumbering scorpion. A second dose will... The zombie nodded and indicated itself mournfully with a jab of the thumb. Well, I shan't do that then, said Cabal. The zombie was just swivelling its wrist to give him a thumbs up when it disappeared, likely to their mutual relief. Throat's getting a little dry, bear with me. I return. Likely to their mutual relief. In rapid succession he was treated to visions of himself as a college don, a miserable morphine addict, a semi-mechanical butler, and to his considerable astonishment, a woman. But how is that even possible? He asked her, which is to say himself. How is that possible, even in a general sense? Complicated, darling, said his female alter ego, affixing a cigarette into a holder. Complicated? It's well nigh inconceivable. She did not look at all like him, although when she looked sideways at him, he recognised those eyes very well from his shaving mirror. To his horror, he also found her, which was to say himself, attractive. His confusion either showed on his face, or she remembered this interview all too well. She smiled with amusement. So vain, she said. She blinked out of existence, even as she was reaching for her lighter. He was caught by the lee for a long moment. Everything else he could see a path to, even the semi-mechanical butler, a fate he'd dodged once and would apparently have to watch out for again in the future. A woman, though, how... Kindly attend, said the man sitting opposite. It was Johannes Cabal, of course, but unscarred and trammelled and his usual gender. He was also unaged in any way and wearing exactly the same cream linen suit. How far are you from me in time? Asked Cabal. The man consulted his pocket watch, then held it up for Cabal to see. A swift comparison showed a difference of only 3 minutes. Cabal's brow clouded as he put away his watch. I don't understand. I know, said the man, so listen. That stuff, he nodded at the Ouzo bottle, is a trap. Puts you into an impossible position of second-guessing yourself for the rest of your life. Every possibility, every contingency will haunt you and persecute you. Presently, you will find it impossible to make a decision for fear of what may result. Are you saying that all this effort was for naught? No, you're saying that. I'm saying that while the Boris Ouzo may not give you the clear-cut path that you hope for, nor is it entirely useless. For example, quite small decisions in your immediate future, ones that you consider as a matter of course, may lead you to fates you have not seen. Not all are so bad. I do not wish to be a woman. Yet we seem quite reconciled to it. That is by the by. He checked his watch. There's little time left. The lesson from today is that we tread a path that is unusual rather than unremittingly deadly. You've had some warnings. Be on your guard against the ones where you end up dead and buried, dead and wandering around, or a solicitor. What about the morphine addiction? Yes, the man said that as well, I suppose. But also remember the ones where you were happy. I do not do what I do to be happy, said Johannes Cabal. You cannot lie to me, said Johannes Cabal. Suddenly, he was alone once more. He had been so startled by the first appearance that Cabal had not entirely sensed the change in his perceptions brought on by the Ouzo. When the change faded from him now, however, he was entirely aware of it. The prickling at the back of his neck as countless potentials elbowed their way into the actual were gone. He could see the truth he had discovered within and from himself. The liquor was a trap. He could see that now. It would have removed his ability to take risks if he let it. Yet he had given himself wise counsel. He was the captain of his own fate, just as he had always been. It was good to know it as a fact, and to see some of the rocks that lay in the gloomy ocean of the yet undone before him. He rose, eager to be on his way, eager to be back in his laboratory and working once more. Halfway to the door he faltered and looked back. In the chair that faced the door was the slightest shadow of a man. It looked nonplussed, perhaps by some startling revelation. Cabal considered walking out just to see what might happen, but decided not to. After all, one can only tempt fate so far. Johannes Cabal sat in the chair whose back was to the door, and he waited. And that's the end. Who was hoping for an exaggerated German accent? Hello. Oh, gosh. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. Oh, no, I'm hot, says Brie. Hello, Brie. Was that fun? The end again. And again, the interminable wait while YouTube catches up with my blatherings. Oh, gosh. Too much booze. Thank you. Ach, scheiße. Yes, that does pretty much pull it down. Oh my God, I'm attractive. Worst of all, I'm attracted to myself. The Narcissus complex writ large. Thank you very much. Well, let's see, how long's this wretched thing been going now? Oh, 1 hour 37 minutes according to my clock here. My throat's starting to give up. Yeah, when you're doing readings and stuff, you're not really supposed to do booze because it's not great for your throat. You're supposed to stick with water. So I'm drinking this stuff and it's not actually doing my throat much good. Yes. Yes, I noticed that as well, Sydney. It was I was handling those polysyllabics quite well at first, and then towards the end it was getting in. How exactly do I pronounce that? Lewd Cabal fanfics. Now, here's the thing about fanfics in general is I try not to read them because I'm always terrified I'm going to come across one that's got a really nice idea in it, and then I've never knowingly plagiarized, but you know, stuff sticks in your mind, and so that's something I'd like to avoid. You got to alternate water and alcohol. You're absolutely right, and all I've got here is booze. Boozy booze booze. I've got the rest of this cider, and then I've got a shot of brandy, and I've got a shot of whiskey here I haven't even got onto yet. Blimey. So yes, I think that's as good as time as any to wrap up. Thank you very much for this thing, which was extemporized at quite short notice, and my thanks to my daughter for not looking at me with too much disgust when I said, "How the hell do you live stream stuff?" Oh well, you need a front end thing. What are you going to be using? YouTube. Yes, but what are you going to be using with YouTube? I have to use something with YouTube? Yes, you do. So I was educated there. So I've got a piece of software which I've never used before in my life called, I forget what it's called, X something, which is actually encoding the stuff and then squirting it in the direction of YouTube. So there you go. Oh no, Sydney, you spilled your wine. That's the worst. Right, well, thank you all very much for attending, and I shall bid you all a good evening or night, or I've no idea which time zones you're in. A good day to you anyway. And I don't know, this was fun. I might do this again, actually. Thank you very much. It has been fun, and yes, I'll likely do this again. Maybe not specifically boozing, but it's a giggle, isn't it? I had a good time. I'm not reading the new short story for the excellent reason that it's nowhere near complete, and it needs a great chod of research, which I can't do at the moment because I've had to order a book to do the researchy bits to it. So I've written around the researchy bits, but I'm going to have to fill those in when the book turns up. I will tell you this much. It is the most flat out horrific Cabal I've written. It is actually quite nasty. It's more towards the nasty than it is towards the humorous, which is something different for Cabal. I think it works as a horror story. Still has its giggles in it, but it's primarily a horror story rather than a sort of humorous dark fantasy this time. Just a little bit of an experiment. Normal service will probably be resumed after that, certainly when I get round to writing Maple Durham one of these days. But I just wanted to have a shot at doing a Cabal. Well, a friend of mine actually kind of provoked me into it. Go on, write some horror, write some proper horror. Go on, blood and guts and horror. Yeah, right on. No, 1,000 times. Oh, all right, I'll do it. So that's where that's come from. Right, well, thank you all very much for. I think that's the third time I said thank you very much. And I'll bid you all a good night, good day. Cheerio. Now I've just got to figure out how to switch this damn thing off. I wonder if that does it. No, that won't do it. Will you do it? No, that won't do it. I'll try this. Will that do it? I don't know how to stop. There's no stop button. How does this work? Okay, this is embarrassing. Oh, that might do it. Bing!